I'll go back to Catherine, and I'll tell you, we heard at the last ASCO, which is, barely a year ago, that a new drug called lenvatinib was actually tested against sorafenib in a phase 3 trial, and the study appears to be, it was positive. Tell us more.
So lenvatinib is another tyrosine kinase inhibitor. It was tested, as you said, head-to-head in frontline therapy in patients with advanced HCC. It was powered as a non-inferiority trial, and as you said, it was a positive trial. Interestingly, with the lenvatinib data, we actually found that there was a fair response rate with lenvatinib. Over 20% of patients, 1 in 4 patients, had partial response. They also had a prolonged time to progression as well as a prolonged progression-free survival. And those 3 things were actually statistically significantly superior to sorafenib. Now, interestingly, even though they had a better response rate and better time to progression and progression-free survival, that didn't translate to a statistically significant prolonged overall survival of lenvatinib compared to sorafenib. So as Anthony had stated earlier, the progression-free survival doesn't necessarily correlate to overall survival. But this does add another frontline option for our patients at this time.
That's great. And if anything, the targets of the lenvatinib, including the FGF, add to the PDGF and VGFR, is very important in regard to probably that's why there was certain nuances, as we agreed, that were, as we just heard, that really showed that lenvatinib, after all, has a certain plus compared to the sorafenib, despite at the end of the day, the overall survival was similar between the 2 studies. And now, Ruth, lenvatinib, which already is in the market for other indications, and the expectations probably will be FDA approved, but how would you theoretically choose between lenvatinib and sorafenib?
That's a very difficult question. I think
that's why I asked you.
In this circumstance, usually we would look at the side effect profile and try to pick each one therapy based on the toxicity profile. But really, I believe the landscape for HCC treatment is shifting. I think I suspect we will have more frontline therapy options to choose, and eventually, hopefully, we'll come up with a strategy on how to pick those therapy. Currently, there's no standard strategy how to pick either one.
I might agree with you in regard to the potential for the side effects playing a role in regard to the choice. But interestingly, there are other things that can play a role as well, which is, as I was just alluding to, the actually targets that we're going after. Number 2 is we didn't really bring this up except in the beginning in regard to, you remember, the etiology, and we spoke about the Hep B versus Hep C. We didn't touch on the alpha-fetoprotein level, and I think these kind of things that might actually help delineate the map that you are aspiring for, which is will make you choose one drug versus the other. That's totally fair. But Anthony, to take you back to the checkpoint inhibitors, as we said, the nivolumab approval is pending to be confirmed, the phase 3 trial in the first-line setting, which is nivolumab versus sorafenib. Tell us more about that study.
So Checkmate 459 is actually a frontline randomized phase 3 study. So these are previously untreated patients with advanced hepatocellular cancer, Child-Pugh-A, who will be randomized to nivolumab versus the current standard of care, sorafenib. And the primary endpoint of that study is overall survival. As far as I know, the accrual is completed, and we are pending results on that study. It's important also to note that checkpoint inhibitors are being evaluated in a phase 3 setting in second line. So there's a phase 3 study of pembrolizumab versus best supportive care, also post-sorafenib. That's also, I think, near completion or still accruing. But these 2 large phase 3 studies will provide more confidence in the early data that we've seen with nivolumab.
Absolutely, it will. And no question that so far I'm seeing that the tag kind of is between checkpoint inhibitors first, followed by TKIs, or TKI first, followed by checkpoint inhibitors, other than the choice of which checkpoint inhibitors to use. And if anything, my understanding is that there is a rather another pretty intense study that's looking into checkpoint inhibitors, but specifically into combination of anti-CTLA-4 and anti-PD-L1, which I believe is called the Himalaya, which is combining the durvalumab and tremelimumab. Can you first explain to all of us what is the synergy about combining anti-CTLA-4 and anti-PD-L1 together? Where does this go into regard to the immune system?
Right. So what we alluded to at the beginning of the conversation, that the cancer has multiple ways by which it hides from the immune system. So there are many immune suppressive mechanisms. The checkpoints, which are again like the brakes for the T cells, which are expressed on the surface of tumor cells, but also on the surface of T cells and other cells, include PD-L1, CTLA-4, and others. There are also other surface markers which are more like agonists. They're like the gas pedals, like OX40, for example. So we now have a large number of drugs that target these various checkpoints or agonists to stimulate the immune system. So the idea of combining anti-PD-L1 with anti-CTLA-4 started in other tumor types, actually started in melanoma and has now evolved into other diseases. In HCC specifically, you mentioned the Himalaya trial, which is a phase 3 randomized trial of 3 arms. Again, previously untreated patients who will be randomized to durvalumab, which is the anti-PD-L1 antibody, versus durvalumab and tremelimumab, so anti-PD-L1 plus anti-CTLA-4, versus sorafenib, the current standard of care. There is already actually a phase 1 study that was presented with the combination of durvalumab and tremelimumab, and that showed a response rate of 18%. Incidentally, something was called out in that phase 1 study, that the patients with no viral infection, no hepatitis B or C, had a response rate of 30%. Again, we don't know if this is a factor of just numbers or that is truly a difference between etiologies, because so far we've seen responses across all etiologies with the checkpoint inhibitors. So we will see. The last thing I would add is there are also important approaches that are evolving that you may come back to in the future that are, again, stimulating the immune system from different angles, because there are other cellular components, there are other cytokines that have an immune suppressive role, and combining those also with checkpoint inhibitors is important in the future.
No, of course, I totally agree.